morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are at this time in different parts of the world. You are tuning in to the lecture that is part of the Incheon Distinguished Lecture Series on Buddhism, hosted by Harvard Chem Lab. I'm Eugene Wang, Director of Harvard Chem Lab. Today, we're going to have a very distinguished speaker, and the theme of the topic of today is exploring the future of Buddhism through a historic perspective with reference to the Tzu school of Buddhism. Our speaker today is Rui-Sheng He, who is Deputy CEO of Buddhist Tzu Charity Foundation, and he's also a colleague of mine, associate of Harvard FS Chem Lab. His lecture today will ask big questions, cued in part by the well-known story of the disappearance of Indian Buddhism during and before the 13th century, and the decline of Chinese Buddhism after the Ming Dynasty. So Mr. He will be asking or reflecting on the question of modernization of Buddhism. What can Buddhism do? What did it do in the past? What can it do now? And he'll also reflect on the question of to what extent the global outreach and impact of Buddhism in this day and age, when people yearn for spiritual practice and organizations have resources to do things that make the world a better place. And he will also reflect on the future of Buddhism and reflect upon how Buddhism can adapt to and make more impact on our modern society. Professor He, Rui-Sheng He, as I said, is the Deputy CEO of Buddhist Tzu Charity Foundation, and he's an associate professor at the Tzu University and National Chengzi University. He was a spokesperson and director of the Department of Literature and History of the Shiji Foundation. He received his PhD in philosophy from Peking University, Master of Art on Communication Management, the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism for the University of Southern California. As a veteran media professional, he was a senior news anchor and TV program producer. The documentary he produced, Great Love as Running Water, the history of bone marrow transplantation, was selected as Best Documentary at the Pacific, Asia, and African regions of Emmy Award International in 2004. Dr. He has delivered speeches on Buddhism and NGO management at Harvard University, University of Oxford, Peking University, Renmin University of China, Beijing Normal University, and the University of Hong Kong, and many other international symposiums. So we are very pleased to have him as the distinguished speaker for this Incheon Distinguished Lecture Series. Now, without much further ado, here's Dr. He.
Thank you, Professor Eugene Wang, and my dear colleague, Professor Richard Madison, and Professor Elise DeVito, and all scholars of partner universities of Incheon Lecture Series, and my Harvard colleague, Shiji colleague, and Dai TV crew, and all scholars, students, Buddhist practitioners, and all our friends in Shiji and in Buddhist Sangha, and especially the Jingshi above, most respected Dharma Master Zheng Yan, and all masters and pure practitioners, welcome, and thank you for your attendance. I'm honored to be invited by Harvard University Chem Lab to be the second lecturer of the Incheon Distinguished Lecture Series on Buddhism. Today I'm going to share with you the topic, exploring the future of Buddhism through a historical perspective with a reference of Shiji school of Buddhism. In the history of Buddhism, what did come to an end in India? What did it decline in China in the Ming and Qing Dynasty after 1900 years of its existence? Indian Buddhism originated in 2006 years ago, when the Buddha traveled around the India, advocating rational cognition and transforming the declining mysticism of the Brahmins into a rational moral practice. With the Eightfold Path and Four Immeasurable Mind to achieve ultimate enlightenment. The Buddha was like Socrates, who redeemed Greece from mythology toward rational cognition, and also like Confucius, who transformed the sacrifice to heaven into the way of heaven. As Karl Jasper, the German existentialist philosopher, observed, they were in the axial age of mankind progress toward rational civilization. Master Yin Sun, on the other hand, mentioned that in the later century, senior monk and intellectual moved forward to the exploration of esoteric mindfulness instead of returning to the mundane world and constructing a system of knowledge. The esoteric philosophy of mindfulness is inaccessible to ordinary people who can then turn to Tantra, spell, incantations, and gradually assimilate it into Brahmins. The demise of Indian Buddhism in the 13th century must be attributed to the fact that in its middle and late stage, Indian Buddhism overemphasized abstract philosophy of mind and monatistic self-cultivation, and the lack a universal knowledge system and value system. The emphasis on the management of monk and the lack of attention to the life of lay followers, as Max Weber said, was the key to the demise of Buddhism in India. According to Max Weber, Buddhism did not establish a secular community of lay followers. In the past, Buddhism in India emphasized the practice of monasticism and the management of the monastic community, but not the management of the lay person. In short, it failed to build an organized community of lay followers. Weber said that the demise of Buddhism was due to two factors. First, the lack of organized community of lay followers. The second is a lack of secular, rigorous ethical life. The reason for the decline of Buddhism in the Ming and Qing Dynasty in ancient China after 1900 years of its existence was the overemphasis of monastic temple, leaving the system of worldly knowledge to Confucianism, with the pursue the way of officialdom and business. The lack of worldly value and knowledge system in Buddhism led to its demise. The return to moral practice, as originally advocated by Buddha, means not searching for esoteric experience, but the daily practice that brings in the deep and subtle joy of the Dharma in the peace, stillness, and void of desire. And it should be one of the most rigorous group of the lay Buddhist follower in the world. Further, Shiji built the 10 precepts of Shiji and the ethical code of lay people. This is different from Indian Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism, which focus on monastic practice and monastery management, where the monks were in sand barrel and believers who came to the devotion to the temple, without returning Buddhism to the secular world and without a rigorous secular organization. To help the world, the 4 missions and 8 endeavors of Shiji lead believers from altruism to self-enlightenment, from the material improvement of all beings to the purification and elevation of the mind. This religious practice has been a unique trend in the history of Buddhism. Buddhism began around the 6th century BCE at the time of rapid political and economic transformation and disintegration in India Paurava kingdom. Politically, the kingdom, which has led for more than 10 centuries, was divided into 16 kingdoms in North India. These states were attempting to dominate all of India, the democratic state of Vajji and the monarchical state of Magadha, fighting for supremacy. The Indian economy was in heyday, with the monastery economy replacing the cattle-based economy. The power of commerce threatened kingdom, and the king employed legislation to prevent the erosion of political power by commerce. The wealthy were increasingly insecure, and they would be raided by political power at any time. In terms of faith, Brahmin experienced great civilization construction of architecture, logic, medicine, geometry, astronomy, law, and incantation in the 10th century BC, and formed a comprehensive Vedic canon. Nonetheless, in the 6th century BC, the hereditary Brahmin power declined. The Vedic doctrine became dogmatized from the original one, and its practice drifted from the knowledge of truth to mysticism. In a period of political and economic turmoil, the Brahmin were not able to offer a solution. It was during the period that the Buddha, who witnessed the chaos in India, advocated rationalism, that a rational moral life was the basis for life and enlightenment. His solution was not in politics, not in the economy, not in the world, but outside the world. It was by detachment from everything in the world and then return to the world to be a model for people. Through the Buddha, purity and selflessness, as A.K. Walters say, he and other philosophers of the time looked alternative for a solution, not primarily in society, but in the first place away from it. And in fact, they contracted out of society in order to preserve their freedom. They abandoned the quest for wealth and power and sought peace of mind and spiritual transcendence. Only from an independent vantage point could they hope, as they certainly did hope, to exercise and influence the society they had left and to infuse into better ideal than money and violence. At that time in India, there were two types of practitioners, the Brahmins and the Samana. Brahmins want to learn Veda classic and the ritual of sacrifice and the truth of immortality. After completing study, they will have a family and retire to the forest in their later years, living a roving life. The Samana, on the other hand, is a new kind of non-Brahmin practitioners and so-called diligent people who give up homes, beg for food, travel to the world, practice ascetic yoga, and pursue meditation to achieve the transcendence of life and death. The Buddha belonged to a branch of this new religious practice. Buddha Sakyamuni also means the enlightened one in the Jain teaching. The 49 years when the Buddha preaches was the period of primitive Buddhism, according to Master Insun and Japanese scholar Akira Hirakawa. The original Buddhism came about 100 years after the Buddha's entering Nirvana, and before the second gathering and the split of the Sangha. The sectarian Buddhism spanned from the 1st century BC to the 4th century, roughly 500 years, according to the scholars. Then there will be Mahayana, or so-called Mahagasamgika, and the Theravada and Hinayana and contemporary Buddhism. Humanistic Buddhism and other Buddhism development in the early years of the 20th century in China. The Buddha at the beginning built a democratic, free, autonomous community. The monastic community life, from the twice monthly Upavasata to the promulgation of Patimokkha, was discussed by all members through assembly ritual and a form of transparent consensus decision-making. The Buddha did not attempt to establish a strong central management organization. The second book of the long discourse, Dirgha Agama, the Buddha was nearly 80 years old and feeling not well. Since there were no disciples around, he felt obligated to hold on for some time. When Ananda returned from the fetching water and saw that Buddha was quite exhausted, he immediately held wide the Buddha's body, and after the Buddha had recovered his spirit a little, Ananda eagerly asked the Buddha for Dharma. "O Buddha," he said, "do you have any teaching for the monastic community? After your nirvana, who do you think will lead the monastic community? Do you want to give any explanation or instructions?" The Buddha said, "Do the monk need anything from me? Do you need me for the future of the monastic community?" The Buddha went on, "I am also only a member of the Sangha, and for the past 40 more years, my teaching has been given to each and every one of you fairly and openly. If any of you think and say that I can preside over the Sangha, and the Sangha is willing to be held by me, and the Sangha should be led by me, then you should turn to the person. I'm just an old man about to die. What do I have to say to you?" "O Ananda," the Buddha said, "be kindled by yourself, not by others. Be saved by yourself, not by others. Be converted into Dharma by yourself, not by others." The Buddha Sangha was a democratic, autonomous, and egalitarian organization. All the Dharma by Buddha returned to the self-nature and self-interpretation by the disciple. The Buddha did not want his disciple to believe in him, but in his Dharma. His Dharma is the objective truth. And he wants his disciple to believe in the objective truth that has realized as stated in Connected Sutra Samyukta Agama. Buddha told his disciple, "The law of independent arising is neither created by me nor by any other. O Buddha, who ever existed or will be existed, awakened the law of interdependent origination by themselves." The Buddha idea covered economic, governance, psychology, and ethics, but his disciple did not expound his ideal fully and not to apply to solve the secular world. In my book, The Economy of Goodness, I expounded the Buddha's viewpoint on the economy of six-node Tao and the four sufficiency. The Agama emphasized the four sufficiency for economic life. The four sufficiency include expediency sufficiency, that means commercial professional capability. Second, protection sufficiency is safeguarding property and wealth. Third, good knowledge advisor sufficiency to ensure joyful life with a low relationship. Fourth, right livelihood sufficiency is mean to live within a mindful life with purity and reason. These four sufficiency cover comprehensive way to wealth and happiness in the economy. The Buddha was an eloquent philosopher, and wherever he traveled, he gave talk on various topics to the wise and people at large. However, in the history of Buddhism, the Buddha's ideal on politics, law, art, business has rarely been mentioned, discussed, or extended. The Buddha's idea of the Bodhisattva path to improve the world gained influence in the Mahayana Buddhism period, which, however, still focused on giving the Dharma in relieving worldly suffering, and lacked an overall construction of the worldly knowledge and value system. We can trace this issue back to the preference of the disciple of primitive Buddhism for the transmission of Dharma at the Buddha's nirvana and their preference for doctrine during the Buddhist sectarianism. In his book, The Origin of Theory of Conscience Only, Master Yin Sun said that primitive Buddhism did not emphasize material giving, but mainly on the teaching of Dharma. That means giving the Dharma rather than worldly material improvement and gratification. Providing the way to liberation from the world was the fundamental teaching of primitive Buddhism. Primitive Buddhism did not have a rigorous organization of lay people, a system of knowledge for constructing the world, or a system of ethic for lay people to follow. According to the Theravada, the 7 disciples of the Buddha, including the Lonely Elder and other about 500 followers, consider the early organization of Buddhist followers. However, there is no record of such organization and strict rituals for followers. As in the twice-monthly Upavasata of the Sangha, there are more than 200 precepts for bhikkhus and more than 500 precepts for bhikkhunis. The 5 precepts aside, there is no strict code of conduct for lay followers, like precept for lay Brahmins. What did the Buddha expect for the lay follower? We know that Buddha expected monk to be uncontaminated arhat. Yet while the Madhyama classic expect arhat to attain ultimate enlightenment and Buddhahood through Bodhisattva path. So what did the Buddha expect of a followers, of lay person? How do we understand the cultivation of lay followers? Let's take an example of most powerful disciple of the Buddha, the Lonely Elder. He bought a garden in the capital of Sarvasti in the kingdom of Kosala for the Buddha and his disciple to live in. The garden was so huge and exquisite. It's recorded in the Buddhist scripture that the Lonely Elder bought this garden with the payment of gold for the Buddha. The Buddha and his disciple spent a lot of time here and for summer and sermons. Given to Brahmins was considered to be a great blessing, a notion that was not necessarily emphasized at the time of the Buddha. However, the concept of giving alms to get married was still believed by Buddha's lay followers, rather than elaborate rule of life as in the scriptures. Lay followers practice alms giving, good deeds, and 5 precepts. The Buddha teaching to the Lonely Elder mainly revolve around the concept and the practice of giving, holding precept, and heavenly realm. The concept blessing seemed to be Buddha's teaching to lay followers. This means by benefiting the community and providing for the monk, lay follower may ascend to heaven. It is recorded in connected discourse, Semikata Agama, that after death, the Lonely Elder, with his body come down from the glow from the Tushita heaven to meet the Buddha. Eventually, what the Buddha expects of a lay follower is still the path of liberation, not the pursuit of worldly attainment. In Connected Sutra, Samyukta Agama, the Buddha was carrying a bowl to the city of Sarvasti and happened to arrive at the home of the Lonely Elder, who was seriously ill at the time. But still, the Lonely Elder paid homage to the Buddha and wanted to provide for him. The Buddha accepted the offering in silence. The Buddha showed the way to be free from suffering with endurance, keeping the holy precept. The Buddha granted the Lonely Elder stage of non-returner, the third order of arhatship. The Buddha's expectation of the Lonely Elder was that he would be free from suffering of this world and attain wisdom and liberation to attain the arhatship, this stage of ascent. The Buddha said in Sutra of Infinite Meaning that as the suffering has been removed and the Dharma will be taught. It seems that Buddha's thought in the Mahayana classic to remove material pain before teaching Dharma. But did the doctrine of primitive and sectarian Buddhism lack such an ideal of removing the worldly suffering? When we look upon to what extent the Buddhism impacted the secular world, we should mention the king of Asoka. Asoka was the third king of Qing Dynasty. It was the primitive Buddhist period. Asoka built tens of thousands of stupa during his reign to enshrine the Buddha's relic, and divided the relic of the 8 kings who built their own stupa into 14,000 stupa throughout India. It was time when stupas were in their prime. Asoka waged numerous wars in his early reign, but after converted to Buddhism, he imposed a ban on killing in the court and kitchen, and he began a vegetarian diet. For prisoners on death row, there were 3 days of repentance before execution. Asoka promoted the prohibition of killing and peace in general. Asoka taught his people the importance of honesty and filial piety, and encouraged lay people to enter a temple for short cultivation. Asoka himself also entered the temple for a short period of time. Asoka pacifism contributed to the small northern kingdom in abolishing the death penalty and stopping war. When Asoka was alive, he sent many monks to the island of Ceylon, Burma, Thailand to preach Buddhism. He contributed greatly on the development of world Buddhism. Asoka even promulgated the Dharma, which was carved on stone pillar throughout the whole India. The Dharma Asoka provides is not a cumbersome law, but a life philosophy that incorporated Buddhist thought. Buddhist temple flourished under Asoka, and the state system followed the guidance of the Dharma. But Asoka failed to establish a secular system for Buddhist followers. As a result, Buddhism failed to replace Brahmanism. It's a historical fact that the practical aspect of life was still mastered by Brahmins. Asoka was betrayed by his minister and princess in his later year. And after his death, his grandson abandoned Buddhism and India returned to Brahmanism. Soon, the Qing Dynasty fell too. Max Weber's study points out that from the time of the Buddha to the Mahayana Buddhism, a rigorous community of lay followers was not established, nor was the spirit of Buddhism integrated into mundane life. A comprehensive ethical system of life was not constructed. Even when Asoka revealed Buddhism and converted to it, he still honored the Brahmin and provided them with a great deal of alms. Although Buddhism influenced the royal court, social ritual and ceremony was still in the hands of Brahmins. Buddhism provided a path toward liberation, but lack of comprehensive system of knowledge about the reality of the world, so led the Brahmin with a firm grip on much of the social life. In the 9th century BC, before the birth of Buddha, a group of Brahmin thinkers and poets reinterpreted the classic Vedic text and make innovation in their exposition. Veda was a collection of Brahmin knowledge. In fact, Vedas are not a single classic, but a collection of classics compiled by monks of various sects, including epic poetry, science, logic, astronomy, economy, architecture, art, forming a huge system of knowledge for Brahmanism, involving many social aspects. In the 9th century BC, the Brahmin world-oriented knowledge system was already complete. As a result, Brahmin became a religion, a culture, a civilization, and a way of life. The Brahmin constructed a vast knowledge system and social value in 4th century before the birth of Buddha. Not only various professional secular knowledge was dominated by Brahmins, but also the law penetrated deeply into Indian society. The code of ethics established by Brahmin in the 11th century BC, commonly known as the Law of Manu, has more than 2,600 articles governing social lifestyle and ethical code. The code of ethics is rooted in the core of Indian society and become a fundamental part of people's life and social culture. Even Asoka's policy of Buddhism cannot shake it. The code of ethic was always embedded in the mind of Indian during the period of Buddha's flourishing and including the later Muslim rule or the Mongol Empire. Therefore, during Asoka's time, the upper level of thought was Buddhism, but the technical and norm of life were dominated by Brahmanism. Even Buddhism prevailed. The caste system never disappeared in India. In this way, Buddhism deepened its dependence on the Brahmins, including the Vedic art, spirituality, and expertise. Thus, during the time of primitive Buddhism, the Buddha was revered by the king of Pataliputra still believed in the Brahmins as their teachers. The king worshipped the Buddha on one hand, but worshipped God like Brahma and Indra in the pantheon of Brahmanism. India was pursuing Buddhism spiritually while living in the hands of Brahmanism at the time. The core sectarian Buddhism, Pratyeka Buddha, Japanese scholar Akira Hirakawa thinks that sectarian Buddhism is the Buddhism of disciple, the Buddhism of learning position, not the Buddhism of teaching people. The sectarian Buddhist teachings are categorized by devotionalism, where monks observe the precept, pray for the way of liberation, and do not pursue real-world improvement in its application directly. Monks practice in vast temple garden, abstaining from sex and seek liberation. The king and merchant give huge support and alms to the monk, so that they would concentrate on their spiritual practice without any worries. At the time, the advantage of Buddhism is that provide a stabilizing force for merchants travel from country to country to face various dangerous challenges, planting good rules, and obtain good result. By giving alms and making offering to monks, they gain blessing. Compared to Brahmins, emphasis on ritual and prayers, Buddhism, rational thinking and practice give the merchant the courage and calm wisdom they needed to go through danger and hardship. In addition, the caste system of Brahmin was not suitable for commercial relation with the foreigners. So the merchant came into contact with the various ethnic groups and classes. Buddhism, with its emphasis on equality, became the faith to which the merchant class adhered. By contrast, the peasant followed Brahmanism closely. So as Walter stated, although the king and wealthy merchant believe in Buddhism, sectarian Buddhism devotes too much of its energy not to establishing a new order of world and a new set of law for the lay people, but to debating over the sutra in the monasteries. It was prevalent belief then and through later generation too, that the Abhidhamma focused on the correct interpretation and understanding of scriptures. The construction of broader world-oriented knowledge system for the lay follower was lost. In contrast to Buddhism, the 2,685 articles of the Code of Manual that written by Brahmins has always been the norm of ethical order for all classes, and are entrenched in all levels of Indian society. Brahmanism, thus, is not a social class, but a social institution. The rise of Buddhism did not provide an ethical code of social life. The rise of Buddhism under Asoka weakened the power of Brahmanism only in temporary. But as long as the class order and ethical norm remained in place and was still in the hand of Brahmins, Buddhism as an avant-garde ideal failed of all to penetrate into the secular life of people and failed to establish a new ethic and much less to construct new social institutions. The effort of Brahmanism finally regained power in the Gupta Empire. At this time, Brahmanism and Buddhism were eventually matched. Numerous doctrines from the 2nd century AD show that the royal family donated large tract of land to the Brahmins, and all Brahmin products were tax-free. After the 7th century AD, Brahmin gradually revived and eventually brought Buddhism into history in India. If Mahayana Buddhism is a Bodhisattva path that entered the world, what did die out eventually, after about 900 years of development? If Mahayana, the Bodhisattva, replaced Pratyeka Buddha, become the model of worship for Mahayana Buddhists, the Buddha took on human form, and Bodhisattva took on various forms to rescue sensual beings. What is the meaning of saving sensual beings? The majority of Mahayana Buddhist relief of sensual beings is giving the Dharma and providing the practitioner with a path to liberation from the world. What is the Mahayana Buddhist view for the lay people practice? As Metta Insun say, the trustworthy Upasika and Upasaka are the holy one who see the noble truth. So the Sangha can be assisted for lay follower to maintain the purity of the Sangha. He said that Tissa Magaliputta had returned to Asoka for solving the dispute of monastic community, which confirmed the record in Great Canon of monastic rule in the early days. The monastic community and the lay people love each other in harmony. If a monk offends a lay follower by violating reasonable ethic, and he even had to go to follower home to apologize, and this was so-called happy ritual. However, over time, with the repeated emphasis on the spirituality of being monk, the harmonious integration of being monk and lay follower in primitive Buddhism gradually disappeared. As early as in Uttarapataka, there were lay arhat, meaning that lay follower could also attain arhatship like monk. The Mahayana Buddhism flourished. Lay follower also collaborated in compiling Buddhist texts. In the early years of Mahayana Buddhism in India, normal women and upper class supported Buddhism. However, because of this, the monks who originally settled in a property-free life grew dependent on socially entitled class. They became less willing to leave the human world, in other words. The large number of offerings made the monks who were otherwise out of the world slowly enter secular world. However, in entering secular society, the monk did not build a secular value system based on Buddhism. The secularized monk become dependent on worldly wealth instead of providing a code of conduct and a system of knowledge, value, and organization for the worldly society. The point I'm making here is that at the time of Mahayana Buddhism, including Burma, Thailand, and Ceylon, Sri Lanka, the power of the king was combined with the power of the monk, but did not bring universalization of Buddhism Dharma. Well, not necessarily. It brought more of hierarchization of Buddhism and the formation of the authority, hierarchy, and regime of Buddhist monk. Weber study point out that king effectively tamed society at large through monks and Buddhism. On the earthly level, Buddhism assisted in establishing secular power and dominating the life of the people. The people worship the monk, both for their practice and for the magical power they possess. The ruler relied on the monk for ruling rather than allow the spirit of the monk to prevail in the life of the masses. That's why I thought it was about the formation of regime, authority, and hierarchy of Buddhism, rather than universalization and socialization of Buddhism. At the time, Brahmanism and Buddhism were juxtaposed in India, and the statue of Brahma, Indra, and Buddha were displayed side by side on the bank of Ganges River. Around the 7th century AD, when Master Xuanzang went to India to obtain scriptures. He called India a Brahmin country. At that time, the king of Kosala worshipped the Buddha as well as the god in Brahminism. Although the upper social level practiced Buddhism, social life was in the hand of Brahmins, who developed their professional system. Moreover, as far as the high intellectual were concerned, the Buddha did not stress on discernment. The Surangama Sutra, someone asked the Buddha many questions, and the Buddha asked him 1,000 questions in return. To let go of doubt, no over-dialectic thinking, non-austerity, but a middle path in the moral practice of daily life. Yet in the later development of Buddhism, the intellectuals of upper class in India were fond of dialectic thinking, and Brahminism provided a philosophical foundation for it. The king, including those of the city Pataliputra, revealed the Buddha teaching, but still honored the Brahmin texts as their teachers. The juxtaposition of Buddhism and Brahminism is becoming increasingly distinct in Mahayana Buddhism. In the latter era of Mahayana Buddhism, Buddhist monks focused on the theory of consciousness only. It is a system of deeper understanding of the nature of mind. This profound system of mindfulness is not accessible to common people. I call this as a Buddhist superior spiral for the high-level monk diving into study of consciousness rather than a worldly system of knowledge and values. From primitive Buddhism to Theravada Buddhism, including the Mahayana Buddhism, as Master Yin Sun said, they do not value much on the improvement of material world. The development that made Buddhism gradually move away from the life of the general public. The common people do not have access to the ethical system given by Buddhism at the secular level, so they move toward the mystic art in the various mantra and the tantra of Brahmin. In the beginning, the Buddha was trying to overthrow the mysticism and deification in Brahmins with the rationalism and moral practice. However, after the worship of the holy relic, the use of holy water, incense and candle, rosary, vestment, mantra for prayers, relic of saint, purification, and chanting for the dead were all adopted by the faithful Buddhist followers. And the ritual and mysticism of Buddhism and Brahminism merged. All this mysticism has been an ancient Indian tradition, and after the Buddha's death, more than 1,000 years, it has returned to the mainstream of society. Commenting on the merging of Buddhism and Hinduism, Will Durant said, Buddha, like Protestant Luther, had made a mistake of supposing that the Dharma or religious ritual could be replaced with the sermon and morality. And the rich in myth, miracle, ceremony, and intermediating saint seem to have appeared before Buddha. But eventually, the older faith poured into the younger one. If Buddhism was to take over so much from Hinduism, so many of its legends, its rite, and its god, soon very little would remain to distinguish these two religions. The monks specialized in a theory of conscience only and moved forward a more profound philosophy of mind. Instead of popularizing Buddhism, and the common people went to Hinduism, mysteries, and incantations. Thus, Buddhism already died out in the 13th century, expounded by Max Weber and Master Yin Sun. The final blow to the dismiss of Buddhism was the Muslim invasion of India. The Muslim Sultan massacred Buddhist monks, destroyed Buddhist monasteries, and burned libraries. Since the 10th century AD, temples, gold, silver, jewelry in India were plundered by the Turk, Afghan, and Mongolians. According to the record, King Muhammad of Afghanistan did not hesitate to order to burn the temple. That cost Indians 100 million gold coin and 200 years of labor. The soldier burned it to ashes with the paraffin oil. At the time, Muslim king ordered to kill Buddha monk in large number. On the one hand, Buddhist monks with a shaved head were easy to identify, while Brahmins looked like lay people. On the other hand, Walter believed that Hinduism was more resilient than Buddhism, and the Hindu warriors were always ready to fight, which was their duty. Anyone who died in battle would ascend to heaven. So Hinduism remained alive in area long occupied by Islam, as they perpetuate their faith and sustain their will to fight with the spirit that comes from dialect, vernacular language, and popular literature. The epic heroism of the folk in the form of literature that depict fighting aggression and brutality for justice, and preserving Indian culture supported the rise of Indian spirit. Even Turkish rule, North India, do not assimilate Hindu into Muslim. Conversely, as A.K. Walter noted that Buddhism in this period was excessively philosophical and could indeed be described as collegiate tradition. The teaching would mostly circulate in the universities rather than among the people. When Buddhism was extinguished by the Islamic regime with the final blow, as Will Durant commented, the Hinduism obliterated Buddhism with a brotherly embrace. Brahmanism subsumed Buddhism into Hinduism by declaring the Buddha as one incarnation of Vishnu. The ancient Orthodox accepted the return of Buddhism that had been a heresy to Hinduism. The tolerant Brahmanism stopped sacrificing and incorporated the Buddhist ideal of equality of all beings and the non-killing into the Hindu Orthodox rituals. Buddhism went into history in India. In the conclusion of this analysis, Indian Buddhism had never established an ethical or secular life, a socialized system of knowledge, and constructed an organization for lay followers. It lacked a connection to secular life and failed to establish a real-world system. This is the main reason why Buddhism declined in India. The historical contribution of Shiji Buddhism, as I believe, lies in the development of the ideal of living Buddhism and humanizing the Bodhisattva. The Shiji Marriage Society and the system of Shiji Volunteer, established by the founder Master Zheng Yan over the past half-century, is one of the most rigorous lay organizations among ancient and contemporary Buddhist society. This is true from the number of followers to the cohesiveness of the volunteer organization. Shiji also strives to establish an ethical system for the life of lay people, including the famous 10 precepts of Shiji. This is a new development in the course of Buddhist history. Shiji's idea is not to merely give the Dharma, but to use the compassion altruism of the Dharma to save sentient beings, both materially and spiritually, so they can go from being recipients to being givers eventually to others. Shiji's vision is to achieve the fulfillment of body, material, and spiritually for all sentient beings, instead of just transmitting Dharma, as we discuss this in more deep depth in the latter section. Now we look at the Buddhism in ancient China. According to Arthur Wright, the period of Buddhism adaptation to China was at the end of Eastern Han Dynasty and during the Wei Jing and Southern Dynasty. At the time, each class found its foundation in Buddhism. In the case of the king, after this foreign emperor invaded China, they did not want to rule by Confucianism because they was the Han system ideology. But they also knew that the tribal system which they won the world now, but could not rule China from the horses. They did not want Confucianism not only because it was the system the old dynasty they had replaced, but because the use of Confucian would have to involve the Confucians' entire family system that could be detriment of foreign rulers. In this period, Buddhism provided the foreign emperor with an ideological basis for the governance. Buddhism comes from the West, and many of the monks were foreigners. So using them would not involve the nepotism behind them. Moreover, this foreign emperor considered themselves as a wheel-turning sage king like Buddha. The five Buddha of the Yungang grottos are the statue of five Northern Wei emperors. The Yungang grottos are the earliest Buddhist cave in China, where the Buddha was a prince, and this king took the Buddha as their role model and claimed themselves to be a wheel-turning sage kings. On the other hand, some nobles were migrated to the south and remained wealthy in the midst of war, believe that they are reincarnated as a great bodhisattva who received great blessing from their past life. While the masses would suffer in the war and displaced, so they expected the Pure Land in afterlife. This is why the Pure Land sect emerged during the Qing Dynasty, created by Master Huiyuan. The Emperor Shen Huan wanted to see monk Huiyuan, who, however, was unwilling to meet the emperor and did not support the monk to pay homage to him. When monks do not bow down before king, written by Master Huiyuan, offer a new kingdom of Buddha away from the worldly monarchy. It is the pure land for common people who suffer war and for intellectuals who do not want to subjugate to foreign emperors. In contrast to hierarchy regime and authority of Southern Buddhism, Buddhism in China moved toward living the kingship. During this period of Wei, Jing, and Southern and Northern dynasty, every class, from king, noble, to common people, all found life belonging in Buddhism. The king were incarnated wheel-turning sage king. The noble were great bodhisattva and the celestial being, and the common people pray for a pure land in the afterlife. This is an important historical adaptation of Buddhism in China. Buddhism was supposed to be in its heyday during the Tang Dynasty, when it was fully integrated with the commerce and the empire. Jinghua Chen from the UBC argued that the heyday of Buddhism reached its peak during the Wu Zetian Dynasty. Buddhism then, by virtue of commerce and the empire, command a far-reaching influence. The Dunhuang grottos were built over centuries. The kilometers long Buddhist cave symbolized Buddhist art supported by far-reaching commerce. Whether from the west or from the east, merchants prayed here for the blessing of the Buddha and Bodhisattva in their journeys, and the carved statues and murals were being grateful for their abundance. Buddhist temples accumulated so much wealth, incurred the jealousy of kings. Meanwhile, Confucian scholars learned the 4 books and 5 classics in Confucianism as a way to enter officialdom. Against such a backdrop, the restoration of Orthodox Chinese culture arose. Especially An Lushan rebellion made the Confucian and the emperor wary about the country in the western regions that may intervene in China's domestic affairs. As An Lushan was from Western country, and Buddhism came from the Western region too. For the fear of Western power coveting Han's land and the rejection of Buddhism become catalyst for the revival of Han culture. In ancient China, there were 3 emperors who eliminated Buddhism, confiscated the temple properties, and return a large number of monks and nuns to lay life, which did great harm to Buddhism. From then on, Buddhism declined, together with the agricultural and with the lower and middle class. In such a political climate, Master Baizhang founded agricultural Zen, so that he could live down on his own farming and be self-reliant, live with a lifelong line for Buddhism. Primitive Buddhism did not attach importance to farming, because farming would kill, which is forbidden by the Dhammagupta Vinaya. At the end of dynasty, however, in order to survive, Zen Master Baizhang adapted Buddhism gradually to the way of Chinese organization. The law set by monk Dao Xuan was still Indian, but the law set by Zen Master Baizhang was Chinese law, including the abode in a patriarchal system, in which the abode could even beat the bhikkhus when they made mistake. In the tradition, Chinese thought there were always a patriarchal ethic. Surely, the beating was not intended to oppression or harm, but was like a father teaching the children out of love. The Buddha Sangha that absorbed Confucianism was fully established at the Zen Master Baizhang. Chinese Buddhism gradually moved toward agriculture and became uncoupled from commerce, a phenomenon that arose after the extinction of Buddhism. Zen Buddhism led Buddhism back to the primitive Buddhist path of self-cultivation, focused on inner insight and liberation. Agriculture and Zen are combined. Zen is supposed to be returned to the self-cultivation and insight of primitive Buddhism, not relying on philosophy, knowledge, or the scriptures, but on the intuitive illumination of the self-nature in daily life and farming. During the Ming Dynasty especially, after Wang Yangming, Buddhism declined even more. Wang Yangming's philosophy of mind was closer to Buddhism. Therefore, to study things, to acquire knowledge, to be sincere, to have a rightful mind, represent the thought and self-cultivation in Buddhism. And as to cultivate oneself, to raise one's family, to govern the country, and to harmonize the world are the Confucian wisdom of entering the world. Wang Yangming incorporated Buddhism, featuring cultivating the mind into Confucian system of entering the world, which led to decline of Buddhism. Buddhism was subjugated to the Confucian system. After the Ming Dynasty, the uneducated class entered the Sangha and gradually merged with the Taoist craft. The development and decline of Buddhism in China is the same as in India. The upper level of thought was Buddhism, but entry into the world was in the hand of Brahmins. Buddhism's lack of exposition and construction of knowledge of the world led to its eventual reduction to supplementary system rather than mainstream system. The single way of liberation in Buddhism did not enter the various fields of knowledge in society and did not establish a dense, complex, yet deeply lived social value and knowledge system, including a religious practice system like Christianity, Brahmin, and Muslim. For any religion to become a mainstream religion, the construction of a comprehensive social knowledge system is necessary. Islam, Christianity have long established their secular knowledge and value system. Those constructs of the secular system did not appear or were not emphasized in the development of Buddhism. Buddhism was absorbed by Confucianism in this period, almost a complete abdication to Confucianism in the real world. This is why there is a saying that endeavor from Confucianism retreat into the Taoism and decease in Buddhism. Buddhism is the ultimate belonging only. The common people grew close to ritual, mysteries, charm, chanting a more formalist part of Buddhism. This is undoubtedly a replica of Indian Buddhism. Buddhism in China declined in the Ming Dynasty and in the Qing Dynasty. The Chinese intellectual ruled by Confucianism and the common people in general turned to Taoist craft. In India, the upper-class intellectual revere Brahmin discernment, and the common people tend to Brahmin mystery, incantation, and rituals. The decline of Chinese Buddhism repeated the fate of Indian Buddhism. When Temple Buddhism declined in the Ming and Qing dynasty, lay followers played a crucial role in reviving Chinese Buddhism in the late Qing dynasty. Yang Wenhui became a pioneer of Buddhist education in the 20th century. He saw the decline of Buddhism and decided to revive by printing the scriptures. In 1908, Yang Wenhui founded the Jetavana Hermitage, which became the first new Buddhist education school in modern China and had a significant impact on the development of modern Buddhism. During this period, he cultivated more than 10 monks and lay elite, such as Master Taixu, Master Liao Wu, Master Xu Yun, and Tan Citong and Zhang Taiyan. In 1910, Yang Wenhui founded the Buddhist Research Society at the Jingling Sutra Publishing Office, bringing together elite and laid the foundation for modern Buddhism in China. In the early 20th century, when Taixu Master advocated Buddhism for life, it was the time of the Japanese invasion of China. When the people were being ravaged by war, Master Taixu advocated that Buddhists should also think about the way to survive and save the country. The word life is used to respond to the long misunderstanding of Buddhism as only talking about extinction and emptiness. The word human responds to the parochial folk Buddhist practice of emphasizing ghost and God. The meaning of life responds to the impression that Buddhism only provides liberation from death, refuting the misconception that study Buddhism is to study death in the late traditional Chinese Buddhism. Mr. Taixu advocated a more active involvement of Buddhism in social reform and shared responsibility of Buddhism for the suffering of the nation. Aftermath, Mr. Yin Sun was strong advocate of all Buddha come out of the human world and have not become Buddha in heaven, as here in the Ekotarika Agama, which state that the way to Buddhahood lies in the life and in this world. Humanistic Buddhism proposed by Master Yin Sun, which is also the fundamental teaching of Mahayana Buddhism, emphasizes on the unity of independent arising and happiness of nature, which not only do not contradict each other, but dependent on each other. Master Yin Sun also advocates that the Bodhisattva complete self-benefit with altruism. He said, before one can save oneself, one must first save others. And here the Bodhisattva begins to develop his vow of might. The Bodhisattva is born out of great compassion and remains good ever. Great compassion is the root, secular wisdom, and wisdom and empathiness are all cultivated through compassion. A sutra in infinite meaning say, though a bowman is sick, but its bow will be strong enough to ferry people. The bow is Buddha's teaching. Even though the boatman has not yet attained enlightenment, he would have reached the other awakening shore along with the passengers when the boat reached the shore. The altruistic path to Buddhahood is the characteristic of humanist Buddhism advocated by Master Yin Sun. Let's come to Venerable Yin Sun's disciple, Master Zheng Yan. The era in which Master Zheng Yan lived is much more stable than that of Master Taixu, Master Hong Yi, and Master Yin Sun. In 1966, Master Zheng Yan founded the Shiji Marriage Society in Hualien, a remote area in eastern Taiwan. We are standing here now in the hope that the Buddha, for immeasurable mind, compassion, mercy, bliss giving, would help pain removing, promote social peace, achieve happiness, and the purification of human mind. At the time of her convert, Master Yin Sun encouraged Master Zheng Yan to bear in mind for Buddhism and for sensual being. Master Zheng Yan said that the six words were the spirit and goal of her lifelong endeavor. Master Zheng Yan's view of social reform emphasized that the Pure Land is in the human world and at hand. Nirvana is in the present moment. Enlightenment is in the present mind, and purity is in the present good deeds. So she emphasized altruistic action in which the true meaning of life is rooted. As Master Zheng Yan said, the sutra is the way is the path, and the path must be walked upon. Master Zheng Yan promoted Jing Shi lineage, which believed that the diligent practice and purity of mind is the way to enlightenment, and the path of Shiji sect must be with compassion for the benefit of human world. She and her monastic disciples are self-reliant and do not take offering, but devote themselves to the masses and help all sensual beings. This is an example of the Buddhist practice of self-saving and saving others. Saving means enlightenment. The establishment of Shiji School Buddhism provides a new path for Buddhist social improvement and salvation on earth. The promotion of Shiji Four mission and Eight footprint has allowed people to move from charity good deed to all deeds of goodness, allowing the Buddhist philosophy to contact directly with professionalism in contemporary society and make a substantial impact. With this Buddhist foundation, Shiji has appropriately incorporated with the spirit of Confucianism and the Western scientific rationality, and this able to adapt to society and transform the modern world to a certain extent while promoting the socialization of Buddhism. In his book, Dharmakis Dharma, published in 2007 by Professor Richard Madison, he is also my discussant today. And Professor Madison said that he commends the significance of Shiji to contemporary Buddhism, that Shiji is one of the most important forces in the renaissance of religion in Taiwan. As Master Yin Sun said, primitive Buddhism did not attach importance to material improvement. Shiji has developed four missions: charity, medicine, education, humanity, and environmental protection, all which are rooted to improve the life of the human world. This is one of the influences of Shiji on the historical development of Buddhism. Richard Gombrich, the founder of OCBS, he said that Shiji turned laity into a kind of Sangha. Master Zheng Yan embodied the ideal that all sensual beings can become Buddha, and that all human beings can be sage, a Confucianism highly expect. The monasticization of lay followers is an important creation of Shiji and for Master Zheng Yan. It means the ideal of humanizing the Bodhisattva. I think that this is the second contribution of Shiji on the historical development of Buddhism. The third influence of Shiji is the establishment of an ethical system for lay people. The traditional Buddhism lacked a system of ethic for lay people. The Shiji Buddhism established the ethic and ritual for monastic life and for 10 precepts of Shiji for lay people, a combination of the 5 precepts of the traditional Buddhism and other principles and rituals of life adapt to the modern society. This is the beginning and foundation of Buddhist teaching to establish the ethic of lay people. In the future, when the time is ripe, with Shiji led the Catholic Ecumenical Council established a complete Tzu Chi code of conduct for every aspect of life, an ethical system of self-restraint and with a common covenant. It's not certainly at this moment. Tzu Chi need to develop an ethical code of life for monastic masters as well as for lay followers. The canon law of Catholic Ecumenical Council has a strict system of regulation for the Pope, Bishop, priests, nuns, and faithful lay people in general. I think that when the time is ripe, Tzu Chi may build a Tzu Chi canon law assembly to discuss the system of organization, the mechanism of decision-making, the order of life, and the ethical system for various practitioners. There are three pillars to build up the foundation of Tzu Chi school of Buddhism, which must include the philosophical system, the organizational system, and the way of practice Dharma to reach ultimate enlightenment. These three pillars go hand in hand. The philosophical system of Master Zheng Yan is the fundamental to Tzu Chi sect. The practice of Tzu Chi Buddhism must enter the world and does not leave the world. Thus, Tzu Chi must balance its public characteristic and religious aspect. The challenge of the Tzu Chi Buddhism is that it must integrate its position as public charity with the religious orientation. The former embodied the latter, and the former is made through the latter. I believe that Tzu Chi is still in the process of constructing these three goals. And in the fourth Tzu Chi Forum held in 2016, Master Zheng Yan explained the meaning of the Tzu Chi school of Buddhism. She said, in the 51st year of Tzu Chi, the official transmission of the Jing Shi Dharma, as well as the official establishment of the Tzu Chi path, the Tzu Chi school of Buddhism has been formally established in October of this year, which 2016. And an international forum is held to establish the Tzu Chi sect and to make a statement. The participants were all religious figures and a professor of international renown. From the United Kingdom, from the United States, mainland China, Indonesia, Thailand, and Nepal, Buddhism, Catholic priests, and Islam were all present. I am really grateful to hear them talk. They are all good comment about Tzu Chi, and they are all very positive about the Tzu Chi school of Buddhism. So now I want to say to you that this year, 2016, marked our official establishment of the Tzu Chi school of Buddhism. We are not a Pure Land sect or a Zen sect. If someone asks you or asks us what sect we are, we say the Tzu Chi sect of Buddhism. So that's Master Zheng Yan's teaching and statement to the volunteers. The Tzu Chi Buddhism practiced in Dharma, in the real world, and all it must be diligent, Master said. Tzu Chi has taken the way of great love for 50 years and will continue so forever. As I suggested, the decline of Buddhism in India and China is due to the lack of secular knowledge system, a complete ethical code of secular life, and a rigorous organization of lay people. So from observation, the idea of Tzu Chi Buddhism is to strengthen the Tzu Chi discourse, to achieve universal value, and to establish a model of civilization. Tzu Chi and future Buddhism must continue to develop a comprehensive knowledge system which applies Buddhist philosophy to every professional field. That might include economy, governance, technology, philanthropy, medicine, humanity, education, art, communication, environment, and so on. Second, to build an ethic system for the lay follower and practitioners. Third, we organize its follower that can be adapted and accepted by the modern world. Accordingly, the future Buddhism must develop a universal value, a new form of belief system, thus create a new civilization and a new way of human life. Thank you again for all your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. He, for this highly inspirational Buddhism and its significance in the present world. And also, you define so well Tzu and what Tzu can make a difference. We have two discussions. And first, I want to invite Professor Elise Anna DeVito to comment Dr. He's lecture. Professor Elise Anna DeVito is the chair of the Department of English Language and Literature and chair of the Foreign Language Education Center at Tzu University, Taiwan. She's a historian of modern Buddhism in China, Taiwan, and Vietnam with a special focus on women. She has an ongoing interest in the genres of hagiography and biography in Buddhist traditions, including the life of Thich Nhat Hanh, Dharma Master Yixing. In 2018, she held the Shiji Foundation Visiting Fellowship in Chinese Buddhism at National Chengchi University in Taiwan. Professor DeVito is the author of Taiwan Buddhist Nuns and the forthcoming work, Woman, Buddhism, and Modernity in China, 1900 to 1950, as well as many articles and book chapters on Chinese and Vietnamese Buddhism. She holds a doctoral in history and East Asian language from Harvard University. We're very proud to have her. And has taught courses in history to both undergraduate and graduate students in Taiwan, the United States, and mainland China. Dr. DeVito.
Well, thank you, Professor Wang, for your very kind introduction. Can everybody hear me? Yeah. And also thank you to Professor He for inviting me. Also Professor Wang and all the organizers for inviting me. It's a great honor. And also I'd like to thank the translators too. So thank you so much. These are my remarks. You know, many scholars discuss the rise and development of the Tzu Global Organization led by Master Zheng Yen in the context of Taiwan history after 1945, and or Tzuji's evolution in the context of the Buddhist revival in the early 20th century. As we just heard, Dr. He takes on the far more daunting task to analyze Tzuji's rise and development in the light of Indian and Chinese Buddhist history. Dr. He primarily takes a Weberian approach. It seems with reference to Weber's essay, Hinduism and Buddhism, 1917, and maybe Weber's 1916 essay, Confucianism and Taoism. But due to the limits of time and the fact I'm neither a Buddhologist or an Indologist, I can't address particulars of doctrinal processes. I can't offer that much insight about Buddhism in India. Instead, I have three points I want to make, or topics, very briefly: the strengths and weaknesses of Weberian analysis, the decline and revival in Chinese Buddhist history. We heard a lot about decline. And then we're going to talk about Master Taishu's revival, right? And then the last one is the question of institutional sustainability. It affects every organization. And so we can think about comparing Tzu with three other ones. These are global international organizations. There's Thich Nhat Hanh's Plum Village, there's Soka Gakkai's International, and Triratna's Buddhist Order and Buddhist Community. So let me first go to strengths and weaknesses of Weberian analysis. You know, Max Weber, like Marx, Spengler, Toynbee, Huntington, they took a meta-historical and comparative approach to find reasons for historical development, the rise and fall of civilizations, and so on. Marx looked to economic factors as the base, and then Max Weber, in a conscious critique of Marx, looked to cultural factors. So The main question actually that the main question that concerned Marx and Weber was, why did industrial capitalism arise in England first? And at the great risk of oversimplifying, we can say Weber points to two phenomena: the so-called Calvinist work ethic, where success in business might be evidence of God's blessing, and the disenchantment of the world, which means the mysteries of religion giving way to rationalization and bureaucratization. Now, both Marx and Weber use India and China as counter case studies in their arguments. Weber actually did read Pali texts translated into English and German, but he was neither a sinologist nor Buddhologist. And like many scholars of his time, he focused on sacred texts. They didn't really have that many sources yet in the early 20th century. He characterized the Buddha as a prophet, like the prophet of the Bible. It doesn't exactly fit. He didn't know enough about the fourfold Sangha. He didn't know about lay groups that much. He didn't know about the socioeconomic function of Chinese temples or know enough about the Vinaya or temple administration rules. He characterized Buddhism as world-renouncing and world-denying. He didn't understand the Bodhisattva ideal. He was looking mostly at Pali texts. He said the goal of Buddhism is nirvana, an eternal dreamless sleep. So in sum, Weber lacked the knowledge and sources to interrelate religions to social, political, and economic currents, according to what we have today, our scholarly sources. But see Professor Chen Jinhua's, he worked on monasteries, and he shows us the political economy of monasteries. But having said this, we shouldn't let this stop us from engaging with Weber. His ideas, for example, about charismatic leadership, I will touch upon below. We should still be challenged by it. And now I'll talk about decline and revival. And, I put it in quotation marks. So the decline of Buddhism since the Qing Dynasty, we hear that a lot. It's a recurrent trope in many accounts of the history of Chinese Buddhism. But when we say Buddhism, what does that mean? A certain sect, certain practices and institutions? Are we judging by the degree of political influence, how close, its influence on statecraft? Are we talking about numbers and constitution of the Sangha? Should we include the more popular or the more widespread 3-in-1 religion, Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, the popular religion? What kind of lay associations do we mean? When we talk about China, China is a big empire. China is a huge place. What region are we talking about? And to quote Gilbert Chun in 2019, it has become clear to many that indications of decline were often rhetorical devices deployed for special agendas. The monasteries are in decline, let's close them. Oh, the monks are corrupt, let's arrest them. So sometimes it's there's a rhetorical, a political agenda behind this. It may or may not directly reflect what's happening on the ground. Here is a long quotation by art historian Marcia Weidner. She looks at the decline thesis. Scholars generally agreed that Chinese Buddhism and its art peaked in the Tang Dynasty and then steadily declined in the Ming and Qing dynasties. This judgment was not based on demographics, for the faith continued to grow in popularity and to insinuate itself ever more thoroughly in Chinese culture after the Tang. But if you look at it, you perceive that there's a decline in Buddhist leadership, Buddhist influences statecraft, intellectual rigor, perhaps. If you see that, then you'll say, oh, decline. But this is interesting. Historians have begun to let go of the biological model of birth, fluorescence, and decay, and to evaluate later Chinese Buddhism on its own terms. not necessarily regarding it as better or worse that went before, but as something distinct that invites different modes of research and analysis. And so I think that's interesting to think about the biological model. We don't have to always be bound by it. And more recent scholarship has expanded into areas beyond normative doctrine and intellectual history to include popular and folk Buddhist practices. If you think about it, think of Feng Menglong's stories. You know, you can hear karma, heavenly retribution. It seems like really it's part of the cultural landscape of all the Chinese before and now. Buddhist ideas infuse Chinese art. Gregory Chopin tells us, look at epigraphical and archaeological evidence, not only text, and you'll see new types of things. But at any rate, here's a list of books. There's so many more. There are books talking about the revival and flourishing of Buddhism after the Tang and Sung. You know, they're talking about on the lay level. There's a monk, Zhu Hong, Professor Eichmann's Chinese Buddhist Fellowship, a lay group. Professor Zhang Wu's the reinvention of Chan Buddhism, 17th century. Women in late imperial China who are devoted to Guanyin. Kai Sheng's History of Chinese Buddhist Faith and Life, you know, daily life of believers. So I think these are all really good works we can take a look at. And and I must say, I think we shouldn't forget about the Qing Dynasty. It's a rich topic for further research. The Qing government, they were patrons of some Chinese Buddhist temples. And don't forget about Tibetan Buddhism. Some scholars say Tibetan Buddhism played a large role in shaping the Qing governing ideology. And as far as Chinese Buddhism, late Qing and early Republic, there are so many sources being found now, waiting to be studied. And, you know, remember Holmes Welch? In 1930, he said, China had 267,000 Buddhist temples and 738,000 monks and nuns. And that was according to the Republican government's record. So we have to think again about how much of a decline Buddhism was in. But there's no doubt about it, 19th century, Taiping Rebellion, foreign invasions, destabilized the entire empire, and Buddhist institutions suffered a lot, burned to the ground by the Taipings. And as we know, late Qing and early Republican government, they confiscated temples. They confiscated temples to use for schools, military, and government offices. And this spurred Taixu and many other people, many other Buddhists to get organized and fight back, make Buddhism stronger. So that's where we come in with the 20th century Buddhist revival, organize themselves, carry out reforms, and realize or actualize Rendian Fojiao, Buddhism for the human realm. So now I'll turn to part 3, the question of institutional sustainability. It's, you know, in terms of doctrine, organization, and membership. All institutions face this challenge at some point. And our friend Weber talks about charismatic authority and its evolution. And you know this, charismatic authority involves, according to Weber, it involves a type of organization or a type of leadership, which authority derives from the charisma of the leader. And that means charisma was used in the very early Christian communities in the 1st century AD. And it meant a gift of God, a gift from God that showed you were a good leader. So Max Weber took this Christian term and applied it to his leadership theory. I am oversimplifying this, but Weber suggested a developmental process where after the charismatic founder passes away, leadership might become patriarchal, and then a modern leadership form is bureaucratic and based on law. But we have to ask, how does this process really develop? And can't several types of leadership exist at once? And the very such charismatic leader, our Master Jungyen, there is one book at least about her charisma. Julia Huang's 2009 book, Charisma and Compassion, Jungyen and the Buddhist Shiji Movement, looks at Master Jungyen's charisma and the effective bonds between leader and her devotees. But that was 2009, that book. So in 11 years since, the organization has grown so much more in so many ways. I have no time to tell you, but there's so many topics for everyone to study. It's time to update Professor Huang's and many other people's findings. Perhaps most of all is to research how Shiji has been developing the Jingsa Dharma lineage and the Shiji school, as we just heard from Professor He. Now, Professor He's lecture he talked about the Shiji millions and millions of lay followers. And he mentioned the nun. There are about 200 nuns at the Jingsa abode. And there's also a new group. It's called the Pure Practitioners, the Jingshou Shi, and it's relatively new. They are celibate, and they live at the Jingsa abode, but they work in the 4 missions, and they're very important. They have an important role to play in transmitting the Dharma lineage and the Shiji school. And furthermore, there's obviously there's local lay members. This is recently in Mozambique. Shiji is working very hard in Mozambique and training Mozambicans to lead Shiji in their own country. So it's, for the long time now, it's not only Huachao, right? It's many local people too. So that's another interesting thing we should think about in the future. How the various groups of disciples and volunteers will work together to continue this huge global organization that it's Shiji. And Dr. He said Shiji needs an ethical code of life, perhaps I think he said we should have like Vatican II or something. How to make an ethical code of life for monastic masters, monks, and lay people, figure out the organization structure of this whole Shiji organization. Well, it would be instructive to compare what other global groups are doing. We have Thich Nhat Hanh, in Chinese it's Yixing Chanshi, and his Plum Village tradition. Thich Nhat Hanh is a Vietnamese monk. He's now 95 years old. He's incapacitated from a stroke. He's in Vietnam. But in the 1960s, he founded a new order called the Order of Interbeing. Due to the American War, he was exiled in France. He gathered lay followers and founded Plum Village. And from there, his lay organization grew around the world, and they're all self-run. There's no centralized organization for the lay people. His teachings draw on Mahayana and Theravada and psychological insights and so on. And I'm sure you know about this. He's developed engaged Buddhism based on mindfulness. His lay followers have the 5 mindfulness trainings, which are the 5 precepts. Before his stroke, though, Thich Nhat Hanh really started to build up his monastic sangha of monks and nuns. And he has a new code. He has a new monastic code that he drew up. He ordains his own monks and nuns. So I think he's placing his responsibility now on the sangha, his sangha, to keep his tradition going. I mean, there's still lay people, but I think really he's concentrating on the monastics right now. The next one is Soko Gakkai International, and this group was founded by another name in 1930 by 2 laymen, and it's based on the 13th century Japanese priest Nichiren, who developed a Buddhist practice on the Lotus Sutra and the Bodhisattva ideal. And in Japan, there's many of these Nichiren offshoots. So, and this particular group was founded in 1930. The 2 founders were imprisoned by the Japanese government in the 1930s. One founder died in prison. The other founder led Soko Gakkai until 1960, and then the third founder leader, took over from 1960, and he's still the head. He's 93 years old now and still going strong. But they are only lay. They have international schools. They have, what is this now? They have community centers, think tanks all around the world. And they believe that each person has within the courage, wisdom, and compassion to face and surmount any of life's challenges, based on core Buddhist principles such as respecting the dignity of human life and the interconnectedness of self and environment. Soka Gakkai engages in various peace activities, including human rights education, anti-nuclear weapons, and the efforts to promote sustainable development. And what is this value creation? It's a little bit vague. The positive aspects of reality that are brought forth are generated when we creatively engage with the challenges of daily life. So nothing particularly Buddhist about that, but their practice is to chant this mantra every day, the Nambo Miaofa Lianhua Jing, every day at least 5 times. There are no priests, no temples, but there are lay leaders and community centers. And it's unclear who's going to succeed Ikeda after he dies. It's all up in the air. But it seems like his writing, they're trying to make Ikeda's writings into the core Dharma. And the last one we can look at is the Triratna Buddhist order and Buddhist community. This was founded by a British Buddhist. His name is Dennis Lingwood. And originally it was called the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. Dennis Lingwood founded this in London in 1967. Before that time, he had been in India and he worked with the Dalit Buddhists, the so-called untouchable Buddhists, the untouchables that became Buddhists in the 1950s. So he and Triratna, they still have a lot of ties with Buddhists in India. So his name is actually Sangharashta. So the leader of Triratna is named Sangharashta. He wanted to create an order that's neither Buddhist, neither lay or monastic. So it's a new kind. Some of those order members are celibate. All order members take the 3 refugees and uphold 10 precepts. To support themselves, Triratna encourages members to undertake community businesses according to right livelihood. So they support themselves by business according to the Buddhist idea of right livelihood, to do no harm. Anyone can be a friend. You can take part in meditation and classes at Buddhist centers around the world. They call themselves ecumenical. They draw from Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana, Theravada, and so on. And they say, we just focus on the taking refuge and the five precepts. Before the master Sangharashta died, he already set up a Triratna International Council. And that's the purpose of that is to coordinate the College of Public Preceptors, which ordain their order members, the order members themselves, and the larger community. So they actually have a good organization to carry on after the founders. He died in 2018. But the big problem is that there are serious ethical scandals with Sangharashta. So that might very well imperil their future. And of course, any sustainability of any group, most importantly, depends on young people taking the lead. So Shiji is good. They have worldwide youth organization. They have an entire school system from kindergarten to graduate school, not just in Taiwan, but in many countries. Soka Gakkai also has a school system. Plum Village and Triratna might have more difficulties with the younger generation, I think. But anyway, future comparative studies on the present and future of global Buddhism organizations like these await. I think it would be really great if we could make comparative studies with Shiji. Unfortunately, I have to stop here. Dr. He's paper opens up new paths for macro-historical and comparative approaches. And thank you, Dr. He, for showing us all the new topics researchers can explore regarding Shiji's unique contributions to Buddhism and the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. DeVito, for your, you certainly add more dimensions and perspective on this, and give us really a kind of different take on things, and while to some extent also make the whole discussion more dimensional. So a lot of food for thought, but let's hear from Professor Richard Masson. Professor Richard Masson is Professor Emeritus of Sociology at UC San Diego. He's also Distinguished Research Professor and Director of the UC Fudan Center for Research on Contemporary China at the University of California, San Diego. He's the author of 15 books on moral order and religion in both the United States and Chinese-speaking societies. His book includes Habits of the Heart, Individualism and Commitment in American Life, which he co-authored with Robert Bala and others. Democracy's Dharma, Religious Renaissance and Political Development in Taiwan, which he co-edited with Becky Xu. Chinese Pursuit of Happiness, Anxieties, Hopes, and Moral Tensions in Everyday Life. Professor Masson.
Thank you very much for giving me a chance to hear this wonderful talk by Professor He and to take part in this wonderful forum. I'm not an historian, I'm just a sociologist. And for me, it's impossible to comment in any detail on the immense amount of information and a very rich presentation on the history of Buddhism that Dr. Rui Xianghe has presented in his lecture. In any case, it would be impossible to do justice to this in such a short 10-minute comment. So let me simply confine myself to the sociological framing of his historical narrative. The framing, as Professor DeVito says, is very much influenced by the theories of Max Weber, whose great work on the comparative history of religions talked about the rise of Buddhism in India and its interaction with various social classes and political powers. The overall story one gets from this is a story of how the original teachings of Buddhism were in the end diluted and corrupted by worldly social class and political power. And this indeed is the kind of story that Professor He tells. But recently, there's been published a new book by Hans Joas, a German scholar who is now one of the most important sociologists of religion in the world. In this book, The Power of the Sacred, Professor Joas has a strong criticism of Weber and urges us to find better alternatives to his theory. I believe that his book will provide the basic framework going forward for comparative religious studies. So for the sake of argument, let me try to reframe Professor Rui Xianghe's narrative along the lines suggested by Hans Joas, which I think is kind of cutting edge new theory. According to Joas, a first problem with Weber's characterization of Asian religions is that it's based on very outdated information, as Professor DeVito has told us. But a more important problem is that Weber focuses too much on religious ideas and makes too much a contrast between these ideas and worldly interests. Joas thinks it's much more fruitful to focus on religious experiences and to see how they are given shape by different kinds of organizations and institutions. He finds the model for such a study in the work of Ernst Trelsch, the Christian theologian, historian, and sociologist who was a close colleague and friend of Weber. Weber took important ideas from Trelsch, but Hans Joas thinks that Trelsch had a deeper understanding, and Weber actually didn't learn enough from him. Rather than focusing, as did Weber, mainly on the development of religious ideas and their consequences, Trelsch, as Joas describes it, began his master work about the social teachings of the Christian churches with the lived experiences of worship of the Christ mediated through implicitly shared cultural understandings, which then formed ideals which could be embodied in and shaped by many different forms of organization, all subject to the contingencies of power configurations at different periods of history. Trelsch confined himself only to the history of Christianity, and that was a weakness compared with Weber. But Joas thinks that his basic approach to studying Christianity, the sociological approach, would be a best approach to the study of all kinds of world religions, including Buddhism. So let's try to apply this to the history of Buddhism that Professor Rajan He tells us. As applied to this history, this would emphasize the many different varieties of Buddhist experience and practice. None would necessarily be seen as more or less pure than others. There would be no forms in which the Buddhist vision would be perfectly realized, and different forms would become prominent in different contexts in history, shaped by the particular causes and conditions of the time. Under every circumstance, there is tension between Buddhism's sacred power and secular power, but often some melding of the two rather than a clear break. So, for example, in the Qing Dynasty, the Buddhist Sangha had lost much of the power that it had during the Tang, but Buddhist ideas became woven into the fabric of Neo-Confucianism and indeed into the whole fabric of Chinese society after that time. By the late 19th century, Buddhism was widely perceived as corrupt, but so were all the other major institutions of the late Qing. As part of the general corruption in the 20th century, Buddhism was not seen as having the resources to overcome the corruption and to help revitalize China. But reformer monks like Taishu sought to transform Buddhist practice in a way that would respond to the cultural challenges faced by a modern China. Taishu's project, of course, was cut short by war and revolution, but his disciple Yinchuan brought his vision of humanistic Buddhism to Taiwan, and this led to the formation of a number of humanistic Buddhist organizations, Shiji being the most prominent. Each of these adopted different forms of organization and practice to meet modern challenges. The Buddhist Compassionate Relief Foundation, Shiji, is not formally a part of the Buddhist Sangha. It is a charitable organization, most of whose members and directors are lay people. It is run according to modern professional standards and uses the most advanced modern technology to further its work. But it carries out its work in ways that are infused with Buddhist values. These values are embodied in the Still Thoughts Abode, a monastery with now over 100 Buddhist nuns, led by Master Zhengyan. The nuns lead a life structured by rigorous Vinaya rules, but they also help with the work of the Shiji organization, which is led ultimately by Master Zhengyan, but whose top echelons of leadership are lay Buddhists. The Still Thoughts vision is encapsulated in the Still Thoughts Dharma lineage prayer, which is sung before every spiritual practice, not only at the abode, but throughout Shiji. It begins the Still Thoughts Dharma lineage is a path of diligent practice. We carry on the Dharma's essence and make great vows. The Shiji school of Buddhism is a path through the world. That path is the Bodhisattva path of practicing wisdom and compassion towards all living beings in what they call a Dharma-ending degenerate age, like now. Although this may be a dim view of modernity, the lay members of the Shiji Foundation are committed to using modern means to overcome the suffering of the age with compassion. For Shiji members, their vows to follow the path are carried out in direct personal service to those in need, mainly suffering people, but also a planet suffering from pollution. Direct engagement with people is the core of Shiji's work. Whenever possible, for example, when giving out food or clothing to victims of disasters, they mobilize volunteers to present the gift face-to-face with a smile and a bow. From the point of view of experts in disaster management, this seems inefficient. But a study from Harvard's Business School of Shiji's relief efforts in Haiti showed this approach was actually more effective than others because it built morale among both givers and receivers. Shiji insists on giving help far and wide, and its members take special satisfaction in reaching beyond boundaries of ethnicity, religion, or politics. For example, their vision of a bodhisattva path leads them to rebuild mosques in Islamic communities and churches and Christian communities. They resolutely avoid any kind of proselytization, although of cloaks they would be pleased if anyone followed their example. Thus, although direct service to afflicted people is at the core of its work, Shiji commits itself to using modern technology and organizational methods to make their service as effective as possible. This is a new and creative way of taking on modern forms of organization and technology to practice compassion toward the suffering people of the modern world. But there is inevitably some tension between the Still Thoughts vision and the Still Thoughts in the Shiji organization. Fundamentally, it is a tension between tradition and modernity. The Still Thoughts lineage is both very conservative and very progressive. It is firmly based in classical Buddhist teachings, and its nuns leave the family and at least partially separate themselves from the world. But the emphasis in this lineage is on the bodhisattva path of practicing love and compassion for all living beings and indeed the whole earth. To help her lay disciples follow this path, Master Zheng Yan created the enormously successful Shiji Foundation. Shiji undoubtedly retains a Buddhist spirit, but a problem persists in how to maintain that spirit. Its size overwhelms the small abode of Still Thoughts. Its members all say that the abode is their spiritual home, and they're absolutely reverential toward the charisma of Master Zheng Yan. But the very size and complexity of the Shiji organization sometimes makes it difficult to maintain a simple and wholesome, correct commitment to the Buddhist vision. This particular kind of fusion between a religious sangha and a large charitable organization would not have been possible during the causes and conditions in India when the Buddhists lived, and it would not have been possible in pre-modern China. It is a fusion between a Buddhist vision and modern forms of organization under the causes and conditions of contemporary Taiwan and indeed the rest of the world. As in every era, this sort of fusion creates tensions between the religious vision because religious vision is always higher and deeper than any worldly organization can allow. So Shiji provokes controversy sometimes in Taiwan, sometimes from other humanistic Buddhist organizations, as from other forces in society. This is an overall healthy controversy and is to be expected with every religion and every era as it engages with its particular historical context. And Professor He has talked about some of the path forward in creating a more general kind of code of ethics for Shiji and so forth. And that's the challenge that it faces as it goes into the future. So, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Masson, for your very thoughtful comment. And again, we have new perspectives and really concur well with what Dr. DeVito also said. But clearly that we have a strong sense that Max Weber is someone that we might want to have a second thought, drawing on that intellectual resource. I know a lot of scholars in mainland China who essentially still had that kind of strong grip or try to hold on to Max Weber big time. But thank you both for giving us this new perspective that we should know better now in this day and age when scholarship has advanced so much that the new evidence and new paradigms are in that we should, be ready to embrace those. Well, time is a bit tight, but I want to see if Dr. He has any thought in response to both Professor DeVito and Professor Masson's comment.
Yes, I appreciate so much about the a comment from Professor DeVito and Professor Madison. Both of them are my good friend, and especially Professor Madison. We've been know each other for more than 10 years. And I think they are right that Max Weber's ideal and the study may not really updated, but his observation in cooperated with the Master Yin Sun and Japanese scholar and Will Duran that can conclude some his observations still very effective. And I think the Hans Joas in Germany, sociologists talking about the believer and non-believer, and the debating between these two, and also the sacred experiences that many scholars talking about, like Paul Tillich talk about religion is about experience. And so I think the Hanjos is not about talk about the organization, but talk about how the experience of religion can influence the other institution. He does not really care about how the religion hold on a specific organization. And that's the most Buddhist organization. We're not doing this way, like a Jain is everywhere. It's decentralized organization like a Buddha's Sangha. It's really fluid, very decentralized. But look at the Tzu Chi, it's a very large organization, and you cover different missions worldwide, over 126 countries. It's a very big size. It's Richard Madison concern about the challenge and the contradiction of this public interest and religious perspective. We always, have attention at it. So that's I propose that Tzu Chi might eventually establish in the code of the conduct for the lay people and the practitioners in every aspect. And that's the one hand to look at the Tzu Chi is sustainable. And the other one I look at is how Buddhism can really adapt to the modernity, and how can the scholar or how can the Buddhist practitioner nowadays can apply the Buddhist philosophy into different fields. And that's most important for the Buddhist ideal can really adapt it and accepted by the modern society. It's rarely mentioned Buddha's philosophy on economy, on the poverties, on different fields, only provide the way to liberation. I think it limits the Buddha's wisdom. And nowadays, if the Buddhism want to become a global and universalism and socialization of Buddhism, it must open up its discourse to different fields. And that's, I think, is also sociologist and Joel's advocate. He will try to advocate the dialogue between the religion and non-believers. I think we still have many work to do. And thank you for the comment. And I will, reconsider the essays and more adopt a different perspective to complete my essay, and hopefully can publish it later on. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There are quite some questions from the audience, but in the interest of time, I probably want to just pick one or consolidate. One question that is being raised is that with regard to Tzu Chi's future direction. This comes from Pascal Gregoire, was wondering in what way Tzu Chi can move forward. I guess the answer is already partly provided by Dr. He. But and also it's interesting that Greg Gua asked, when we talk about the possible next step, are we talking about next 500 years or what? So in any case, and the question also is about what are the conditions that would kind of allow Tzu Chi to do certain kind of things, or allow us to predict what Tzu Chi will do down the road.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a really challenging question for many friends that concern Tzu Chi, or even in the insider of Tzu Chi members. I'm insider too, and of course many of the insider try to figure out how can sustaining the legacy of Tzu Chi, that created by Master Zheng Yan. As I just mentioned, 3 pillars to sustaining Tzu Chi. One is the philosophy of Master Zheng Yan. One is the organizational structure that can accommodate, as a medicine concern, the public characteristic and the religious aspect. And the third will be, the practice. How can Tzu Chi members continue the altruistic compassion, and through that to reach the enlightenment, because enlightenment is the key form for Buddhism. So that's still very challenging. I think Tzu Chi members are working on that, and as I also participate some aspect of it, and I think it's a good question, and the challenge is great because all religion are facing the challenge of modernity, the technology, the liberalism, and different ideology now, and also political and economic challenge too. So I think it's not quite easy, but I think Tzu Chi will figure out these 3 pillars. And not only that Tzu Chi concern their own sustaining development, it has also concerned Buddhism development. So apply Buddhist philosophy, or apply Tzu Chi's philosophy into different fields, aside from the 4 missions. I think they should expand their discourse in different fields. And that's I repeat my lectures purpose. And thank you so much.
One of the takeaways we can have from this discussion, or in particular also from Dr. Massen's comment, is that the new focal point is really experience. In other words, rather than the ideas. And then I think that probably explains why Buddhism has wide appeal to global audience. Not that it is much of a religion to many, but rather it's a way of practice, way of cultivation. So we have, therefore, some member from the audience named Kevin Chu, who asked, at present there are many people who like to participate in meditation and live in the temples for a few days, especially the high-stressed group. So he wonders why they choose to experience it. The keyword, experience. Why they choose to experience it, or more exactly, why they choose Buddhism or Buddhist meditation rather than other relaxing activities. Any thought, Dr. He and Professor Massen, Professor DeVito? I guess this is a question that is for all of you.
Okay, let me respond very quick. Is that the meditation, I think it's a tradition from Buddha, also tradition from Brahmins. I think it sustained more than 6,000 years. I think that's the way to calm down your spirit, to ascend your spirit. I think it's true, but meditation has a lot of different methodology, different way of practicing. But Tzu Chi is not emphasized on meditation, but instead they emphasize on altruistic compassion action. Through altruistic action, people might also reach the transcendence and the purity of the mind. As my friend Richard Gongbridge from Oxford said, that Buddhism is not only for meditation. And meditation cannot really equal to Buddhism. There are so many aspects that Buddhism convey. But now I know that it's most popular meditation to different kind of people, non-believer, believer, non-Buddhist or Buddhist. So I think it's good exercise for your mind to become a transcendence and a purity. And that's my answer to the question. Thank you.
Professor Matson, do you have a quick answer for that question? Because I think that probably raise a kind of question a general audience would love to pose.
I think meditation is one part of Buddhism, very, very important part. And different Buddhist groups and different traditions emphasize it more than others. Tzu Chi, as Professor He has said, is more activist, if you will, is more concerned about reaching out and giving direct help to people in need. But, people still need meditation, and Tzu Chi often makes it possible. I think actually in, say, the United States, Tzu Chi has done marvelous work in helping people who are victims of various kinds of hurricanes and disasters and wildfires and so forth, and is very, very impressive. But in a way, it hasn't attracted as many Americans outside the community of Taiwanese diaspora as maybe some other Buddhist groups, because we have many institutions here that help people in need. We have Catholic Relief Services, Jewish Family Services, on and on. And if people want to be involved in helping others, they can do it that way, and it's very available. And groups that practice, for example, Chan meditation, like the Shengyan, Dharma Drum Mountain, for example, are maybe especially attractive to Americans, not just Chinese, because there is something there, a way of meditating that other parts of American culture don't have. And I think it's very important in a very stressful world to be able to calm one's mind and so forth. And so it's attractive in this particular context under these causes and conditions, right? And so I think different forms of practice become powerfully alive under different contingent circumstances, different causes and conditions. And say what is especially powerful in Taiwan or other parts of Asia might not be quite so powerful right now in the United States because there are different needs and so forth. So meditation is one form. Some places and times and contexts and causes are more powerful, important than others. And the Tzu Chi direct help to others is important, but especially flourishes under certain circumstances.
Thank you. Dr. DeVito, do you have a quick take on this?
Right. So meditation, the person asked if going to a temple to learn meditation would be relaxing. I don't think it would be relaxing because, well, first of all, meditation is a practice. It's not something you would just learn in one short visit to a monastery. And actually a monastery is, it's run like a tight ship. So I wouldn't say it's relaxing. You're going to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And before you eat breakfast, you're going to have the morning service and do the cleaning. It's run like that's what I feel like. It's a ship. You're in the Navy, it's like there's a schedule. It's not, if you want relaxation, I don't know, you have to go somewhere else. But if you want to learn meditation, you don't have to go to a temple for that. There are a lot of classes and centers. At a temple, you learn many other things besides meditation. Monastic discipline, you learn how this organization is run, how a community lives together, makes their decisions. So I guess that's how I would answer it. Yeah.
Thank you. This has been a really, really wonderful event and a great discussion. And one of the, what the Tzu Chi story reviews it. In fact, it in some ways it challenges this whole old dichotomy between the sacred and the secular, as also as Ray and our discussant pointed out, one of the success revelation that we can have is, in fact, if Tzu Chi successfully integrate some kind of religious organization, but more a modern international organization as a charitable society, thereby it kind of function in ways that the pre-modern organization probably couldn't. So lots of food for thought, and especially coming from our speaker and discussing the challenge of Max Weber's paradigm and all that, the charisma and all that. So, but we're running out of time. I just want to thank Dr. He for giving us this sweeping take on this big picture issue of how Buddhism goes forward in this global setting and our own time with our own challenges. I want to thank Dr. DeVito and Dr. Masson for giving us all these wonderful, up-to-date theoretical and perspectives. Now, finally, I want to thank our team from CamLab and from Tzu Chi and from UBC who made this event possible.
Thank you.
Okay,
thank you, Professor
Thank you.
Wang and Professor Madison and Professor DeVito. And thank you, Professor Chen Jinhua from UBC. And thank you all of your effort to make this lecture completed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ray, and thank you, everyone. And we shall continue this conversation down the road. I hope.
Yes.
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
It's
Bye,
great talk.
everyone. Yeah.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
谢谢。